This video is brought to you by Squarespace, an all-in-one platform for building a brand and growing your business online. Hello, my angry birds. My name is Mina. I talk about fashion, film, and culture here on this channel. And today specifically, we're going to be talking about being a hater, the death of criticism, and also the phenomenon of the people's princess and the way that criticism affects female celebrities specifically. Okay, so you know how I usually like to start these videos talking about something that jogged my brain recently in relation to the general theme of the video? Well, okay, so a couple things. The other day I went to lunch with my friends Jack and Jordan, and Jack was telling me the latest literary goss. So I feel like this is a little niche, but trust me, stay with me, it's interesting. So apparently last month, I don't know why I said apparently, as if I'm calling him a liar or something. I looked it up. It's real. This happened last month. This writer, Ann Manoff, wrote a scathing review on Book Forum of this essay collection written by Lauren Oyler called No Judgment. Here's a quote to give you a sense of it. No Judgment was originally to be called Who Cares? And perhaps that title should have been retained. Who cares really about any of this? Manoff's review went pretty viral, in part because it was so scathing, but also because, to give a bit of context, Oyler herself rose to prominence in the literary world a couple years ago for writing a similarly negative review of Trick Mirror, an essay collection by another literary it girl, Gia Tolentino. Eleanor Stern explains exactly why Oyler's review made such a splash at the time.
One reason that Lauren Oyler's negative review of Gia Tolentino's essay collection went so viral and got her so much fame is basically just because nobody was writing negative reviews at the time. Especially of popular books, there was just, I think, a general sense that it was sort of in poor taste or in bad form. And there was also, I think, a feeling of scarcity in the world of literary criticism. Book advances were shrinking. There were no more full-time professional book critics at publications. There was just a sense of why attack each other? Why pay people to write negative reviews, even if the book is honestly kind of bad?
I haven't read Trick Mirror in full, and I also haven't read No Judgment, so I plead the fifth when it comes to taking sides. I have no side. But I think regardless of everyone's actual writing, I respect both Manoff and Oyler as people who are brave enough, let's say, to publish something negative. I think some of their criticisms did come across as a little too harsh, specifically the who cares bit I read. I felt like that was a little below the belt. But I do think that negative reviews in general are important. And lately I've just noticed there's so much fear in the criticism space, and it's really sad, and it's a disservice to the art ecosystem. And I don't really know how Lauren felt about reading this review about her book. I'm sure she didn't like the review. Whether or not she liked it, she allowed herself to become a target of equally negative reviews, because it's kind of that saying, oh, if you can't take it, then don't dish it. I was gonna say, if you smelt it, dealt it. That's definitely not the saying. I think it's if you can't take it, don't dish it, or don't dish what you can't serve, or whatever. Because she's someone who is unapologetic about the kind of reviews that she writes, I feel like it's an open invitation for people to be the same with her, whether or not she likes it. I commend her for opening that space of criticism. Another thing that happened, or I guess another example that got me thinking a lot. I love Letterboxd. It's this online platform where you can log and review movies. I use it a lot for logging in movies that I want to watch in the future on my watch list. So if someone gives me a good recommendation, I'll add it to the list, which, is something that I refer to whenever I'm looking for a new movie. And hopefully I'll get through them all one day, but there's hundreds of movies on that list, so the future will see. But it is a social media platform in the sense that you can also follow other people on that platform, and you can even follow Emmy Award-winning actress Ayo Edebiri. Yes, Ayo does have an account, but I noticed that she actually stopped logging in movies about a month ago, and I don't know if it's just she just stopped for the month or if she's stopping fully, but I wouldn't really be surprised if she stopped fully, because I also noticed, not to sound like a stalker, but in the last couple months, her reviews have skewed fairly positive, whereas in the past, she was a little bit more critical about some of the movies that she didn't like, and I don't blame her. I think being in her position in Hollywood right now means she can't risk offending anyone because she might have to work with them in the future. I was wondering how much of this decision to kind of edit her letterboxed in this way was because she's afraid of, making enemies, as I said, or because she just like, feels like she doesn't want to share negativity anymore, which is totally fine too. I mean, she's not a critic, so she can use her letterbox in any way that she wants. I'm not saying she has a responsibility to say something bad about anyone. I think it speaks volumes that the only controversy Io has been involved in so far in her career is when her negative comments about Jennifer Lopez's music career from a 2020 podcast interview resurfaced ahead of her and JLo's dual episode on SNL.
Today I was actually thinking about one of my favorite scams of all time, because JLo is hosting or is performing at the Super Bowl halftime show.
She is, which is a scam in itself.
And her whole career is one long scam.
Oh, the longest con. JLo can't sing. And did you know that JLo doesn't know that she can't sing?
She thinks she's on multiple tracks, but it's not her. I think she thinks that she's still good, even though like she's not singing for most of these songs.
And I assume that it was just a very awkward thing to deal with that situation, and Io calling JLo's career a scam was not like the most PR friendly choice of words, but it does make me wonder like where we draw the line between hate and criticism.
Your review was mean and petty and despicable. This was all in the line of duty. You called me a hippo.
I think this PR friendliness, though, has permeated throughout the entire industry in general, and audiences are also becoming more aware of it. With the Bridgerton Season 3 press tour, for instance, I've seen like so many people talk about how great PR chemistry co-stars Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton have, which is to say like people are enjoying their banter, they're enjoying the little flirtations, but they're also like fully clocking the agenda behind it. In a way, like I'm really happy about that because I think it means that we're like able to sort of see Hollywood less as sheep. But I also think that there are definitely like people who are nostalgic for early 2000s celebrity culture because stars from that era come across as like way more authentic. We have a lot to discuss for this video. Let's just dive in. Excuse the backdrop. I'm filming from London right now, but it doesn't matter because today we're sponsored by Squarespace, which you can use anywhere, anytime. If you're aesthetically driven like me, but sadly without a design background, Squarespace offers pre-made templates to get you started, plus so many other customization options, so you never have to feel creatively stifled. A lot of people use websites as storefronts these days, and Squarespace has all the tools to accommodate that. You can easily sell anything from physical products to downloadable products to memberships. And if you're inspired by this video and want to blog your movie reviews, Squarespace also offers powerful blogging tools to share stories, photos, videos, and updates. You can categorize, share, and schedule your posts conveniently and keep your audience engaged and updated as easily as possible. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Mina to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain.
We got you saying a second ago. Tell them dirty Jason.
Ever since there's been art, there's been critics. And ever since there's been critics, there's been artists hating on said critics. It's a beautiful cycle.
You take this malicious, cowardly, shittily written review and you shove that right up your wrinkly tight.
After all, the 18th century poet Alexander Pope once said, "Those monsters, critics." This sentiment has followed to the modern day. The Ringer published an article in 2019 called The Great Celebrity War on Criticism, which documented some recent artist pushback. In the article, they mentioned Lizzo's now deleted tweet, "People who review albums and don't make music themselves should be unemployed," in response to a Pitchfork album review. She then later walked it back. Also, another tweet that was included in the article, Ariana Grande's deleted tweet, "One day, everybody that works at all them blogs will realize how unfulfilled they are and purposeless what they're doing is. I can't wait for them to feel lit inside." Now, getting a shady tweet, not the worst thing that can happen to you. Getting professionally blacklisted, that is a real fear, and it happens. For example, in the late 2000s, former New York Times fashion critic Kathy Horan was banned from Giorgio Armani, Carolina Herrera, Helmut Lang, and the Dolce & Gabbana fashion shows because her criticism was found slanderous. And Robin Given, the Washington Post fashion critic, lost her front row seat at Chanel after criticizing Karl Lagerfeld in 2012. There's many reasons why criticism gets a bad reputation. A lot of it is wrapped up in artist ego, but let's pause, right, and take a stance with the artist for a second. Maybe criticism has actually just gotten worse and therefore is deserving of less respect. Has anyone ever thought about that? One reason I say that is because there's a lot of art being made more than ever before thanks to social media allowing people to self-publish. There's just not enough time to give thoughtful reviews on literally everything. In an article for The American Scholar, author Philippa K. Chong suggests that fewer than 5% of new books get any kind of coverage in larger media outlets. A lot of critics have also sold out, not necessarily even selling out to the movie or book they're reviewing, but selling out to the publication that they're writing for. And what I mean by that, and maybe like selling out might not be the best term, I don't know. I love reading reviews, okay? And I've noticed that a lot of mainstream coverage of TV, books, and movies is arranged in the form of recommendation listicles and plot recaps. And even if there is a coherent review, the headline makes like some sweeping statement like, blah, blah, blah is a must-see, or blah, blah, blah is a major miss. Christian Lorentzen wrote for Harper's that the reason we get these kinds of general clickbait headlines is because writers need to attract traffic to the review or to the website. He writes, a conscientious reviewer admitting either to ambivalence or judgments in conflict with one another won't travel as quickly on social media as an unqualified rave. And as books editor Ariana Rebellini succinctly put it, are you going to put your time into something that's not going to share well? I relate to this heavily, by the way. When I publish videos, I have to make like kind of clickbait adjacent headlines or thumbnails because I need people to watch my videos to click on the videos. So for instance, one of my older videos I titled Netflix's Persuasion was a flop. Transparently, okay, I found the movie to have a lot of flaws and I stand by that. I'm not gonna walk back on that. But I do think that the word flop and other sort of like general black and white terminology never really do a piece of work justice. There's just so much that goes into a book or movie, and none of that can be summed up in just one word. You know, maybe one of the reasons why critics and myself are so desperate to drive traffic to our work is because of how oversaturated the online review industry has become. The internet has basically made everyone into a reviewer. And again, look, I realize how hypocritical I sound because I've definitely benefited from that. Like, I did get a degree in film studies, and I can admit that my reviews tend to be more fun and casual than like actually academic. But the fact is that there are a lot of takes online, and we have to lean on like more sensationalized headlines to stand out. And I also noticed that around the time I started making videos, like in 2020, 2021, there's been just a general rise in the commentary genre on YouTube and TikTok overall. Don't get me wrong, people have always liked to discourse online, okay? In my early internet days, I would spend a lot of hours every day reading and writing meta commentary on Tumblr. I'm proud of that, whatever. But I think the pivot to using TikTok and YouTube as these new commentary engines has a lot to do with, one, people's increasing comfort in filming video, aided by how easy it is to edit videos within the TikTok app, especially if you don't have clumsy thumbs like myself. And two, a lot of social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, and now Substack are also trying to pivot to video as well, which is making writing a less available medium to relay your thoughts. And then, of course, also reason 3, once something is perceived as a profitable trend, other people want in. If you notice there are creators getting hundreds of thousands of views on a genre of video content, you might want to try that out too. I'm not saying this is entirely bad, by the way, but it has made the market more oversaturated, which has led to, I think, a devaluation of professional critics in general. Because, like, the sentiment is, why listen to this person when everyone can have an opinion on the internet now? There are also websites that specifically encourage amateur criticism, for example, Letterboxd, which I mentioned earlier, and Goodreads, which is a book review site. Both these sites use a 5-star rating system, and okay, personally, I don't use the rating feature, which I know is annoying because I've gotten comments every so often about why I never rate anything. Hear me out. I just don't like the subjectivity of the star system. Like, a movie that I rated 5 stars 3 years ago wouldn't necessarily rate 5 stars if I watched it again today. And so it feels weird to me that if someone's just like looking at my profile, they can see all the movies that I've rated 5 stars, but they wouldn't have any context on like how old I was when I saw the movie, whether or not someone was kicking my seat in the movie theater when I saw it, whether or not I read reviews beforehand, which affected my expectations. Sidebar, when I watched Challengers, I watched it opening weekend. I didn't even know it was opening weekend. Like, I just picked a random movie because I hadn't seen a movie in a while, and I didn't know anything about it, like, except from, like, the trailer that I saw literally months ago. I didn't see a recent trailer or anything, and I loved the movie, and I think it's because I literally had no expectations. I mean, I also think that, like, Luca Guadagnino, like, slays, and the script was, like, really good and everything, but I just think that it definitely helped that I didn't have other people telling me this movie was going to be amazing before I went to go see it. I also think that there are some movies that really resonate with me solely because of my life circumstances at the time I watched them. So, for example, After Sun is one of my favorite movies. But I'm very aware that I watched it on the airplane coming back home after visiting my dad. Yeah, I was like crying. I was crying on that airplane all by myself. It was so tragic. If you haven't seen the movie, just know that it's a father-daughter movie featuring an airport scene. On the flip side, you know, I did really enjoy Past Lives, but I've never experienced the sort of like what if romantic circumstance that they explore in the movie. And so I didn't feel as moved as my friends who have been in those circumstances. All this is to say, my circumstances don't alter whether or not the movie is good, but it alters like how emotionally connected I am and therefore affects my experience watching it and therefore my rating. But if you're just someone scrolling my page, you wouldn't have that context. And then, I don't know, it makes me feel weird that someone would choose whether or not to watch a movie based on like the stars I gave it and then them not knowing the context. I don't know. I just don't like that responsibility. In short, I don't think a star system can capture all the nuances of engaging with art. Anyways, that was just an aside, but I was reading Jacob Silverman's 2012 essay Against Enthusiasm the other day, which is about how social media has killed literary criticism, and I thought it was really interesting. I highly recommend reading it. One of the points he made is that sites like Twitter put you more intimately in contact with the author, which affects how comfortable you feel talking about their work. Silverman chose author Emma Straub as just an example. Let's say you're assigned a review of Straub's book, Laura Lamont's Life in Pictures. What if you don't like it? Would you be willing to critique Straub's novel after watching her life scroll out on social media over the last year? Indeed, after likely being the recipient or admirer of some small word or act of kindness on Straub's part? And I think this is so true. I think I'm more hesitant to criticize a friend's work publicly because I don't want whatever I have to say to affect their success, especially because most of my friends are at the starting points of their careers. So they don't have the kind of staying power that a big director like Quentin Tarantino would have in the face of negative reviews. And I imagine that people who are parasocial towards artists might feel a similar pressure to be constantly uplifting to not mess with that person's bag. As Chromat founder Becca McCharran-Tran explains how it works in the fashion industry, when we were trying to sell our collection to buyers like Nordstrom or whoever, they actually really did care about reviews. So over Fashion Month, there are a handful of people on Twitter and TikTok who complain about how front rows are filled with influencers now, and meanwhile, actual journalists are shoved to the back rows where they can barely see the collection. And I understand this is really annoying, especially because if you're a journalist, you actually need to cover the collection. So it is very annoying if you can't fully see it. But the reason this is happening is because the majority of influencers are invited to positively market the brand. Brands know that any influencer they invite is going to gas them up to the moon and back to their millions of followers. Whereas with a journalist, it's more up in the air, the kind of coverage that the brand would get. So, given that information, like, who are you going to prioritize? Silverman also notes that social media's liking and favoriting system itself is pretty anti-criticism. He writes, "The problem with liking is that it's a critical dead end, a conversation non-starter. For every +1, this or heart emoji we offer next to someone's fawning tweet, a feeling is expressed without saying much at all." Ultimately, these platforms have led to a culture of enthusiasm and unconditional support, which is, again, why author Lauren Euler's critique of Trick Mirror went so viral in 2020.
Look.
Yes.
Didn't you bring your glasses?
Criticism also gets a bad reputation, I think, because a lot of people don't actually read professional criticism from professional critics. Their exposure to criticism is via like TikTok commentary. And unfortunately, a lot of TikTok commentary is just not good. No shade. And it's just like representative of a larger trend of low media literacy. And I know that media literacy is like a buzz term these days, but in case you need a refresher, according to dictionary.com, it means the ability or skills to critically analyze for accuracy, credibility, or evidence of bias the content created and consumed in various media. But unfortunately, like, media literacy is a problem. 2019 Pew Research survey results revealed that digital media literacy skills are lacking across all generations across the board, even among Gen Z who grew up with technology. Maxine Becerra reflects on why that is. She writes for McGill University's student paper, The Bull and Bear, "How have we gotten so bad at critically thinking? I suspect that it's a function of the sheer amount of information available these days. There is so much content that I really only have time to skim over the basic premise of a video, article, Instagram infographic before I must keep scrolling and maximize my media consumption. I'm forced to sort things into a binary just to quickly make sense of it. All actions are either good or bad. All opinions are either right or wrong." These social media platforms discourage nuance, and if you don't like someone's content, you unfollow or you block them. Associate Professor of Information Studies Alexis Hineker says, "All of those things cut off relationships instead of helping people repair them or find common ground." Over the past year, I've noticed a lot of poor media literacy when it comes to movie reviews in particular. For example, there was a lot of online discourse about Dune Part 2 when it first came out. Some people were criticizing that the movie was pushing a white savior complex, for instance. If you're unfamiliar with Dune, it's this sci-fi multi-book series, but the two movies that were directed by Denis Villeneuve focus on the first book, Dune, which tells the story of Paul Atreides, who, after a series of unfortunate events, which is like an understatement, flees his home and seeks refuge among these indigenous nomadic people called the Fremen. The Fremen perceive Paul as this messiah figure who will lead the revolution. In the second movie, we see Paul internally struggle with that responsibility, being tortured by visions of mass death if he rises to his fate. But then he eventually embraces his messiah role, which honestly made me want to smack him over the head when I was watching. It's fine. So yeah, despite Timothée Chalamet's charm and good looks, we're not supposed to root for Paul. The writer of the books, Frank Herbert, has talked about how Dune is actually a cautionary tale about charismatic leaders. In 1979, he said, "The bottom line of the Dune trilogy is, beware of heroes. Much better to rely on your own judgment and your own mistakes." Now, I haven't read the books, that's my disclaimer, but for the most part, the interpretation of Paul as a white savior falls pretty flat to me. Maybe somebody out there has a more compelling argument, but from what I've seen, people who have this take are looking at the movie very superficially. They see Paul as this like naturally talented chosen one and are understandably uncomfortable seeing these indigenous Fremen people worship him. But I feel like that's where the analysis stops. To be fair, though, this interpretation has been a problem since the beginning, and it's actually why Herbert ended up writing the sequel, Dune Messiah, to emphasize even more that Paul is not a good guy. There's even a comparison to Hitler to further drive home that point. Villeneuve also took some creative liberties to make it clear in his movies as well. So for instance, Chani, who is Fremen and Paul's love interest, is much more doting towards Paul in the original books. But in this new movie, she becomes sick of his shit, leaves him, and there's an implication that she'll come back one day to challenge Paul as a resistance leader. She is the character that we're supposed to be empathizing with. Dune has a lot of shooters, though. It's like been a series that's been around for decades. And so anytime someone shared this white savior take, I noticed a ton of people jumping on them. But instead of like engaging with these opposing takes, the original posters mostly fled the scene. And I can't really blame them because the way that online discourse functions is just not conducive to understanding like anything. Like, for instance, I saw so many people stitching this poor girl's video, all of them saying virtually the same thing, which I'm sure felt like dogpiling in her notifications. In real life, if you're in a debate, only one person at a time would challenge your opinion. But online, you get jumped by tons of people yelling the same thing at you. And so I can understand wanting to just ignore all of that, which is a shame because it doesn't further any kind of understanding. With that said, in general, I'm less interested in people taking the wrong message away from movies. I believe there are very few wrong messages, actually, which is why I'd still be open to hearing a Dune white savior take as long as it makes sense. It was French philosopher Roland Barthes who wrote about the death of the author, which argues that the meaning of a text is determined by the reader's interpretation, not the author's intention. And it's this idea that once you share your work, it no longer only belongs to you. And I agree with this theory. So even though I love reading what writers have to say about their work, I also love when like directors like David Lynch refuse to ever explain anything.
Believe it or not, Eraserhead is my most spiritual film.
Why elaborate on that?
No, I won't.
And I also love saying that J.K. Rowling was incorrect about everything when it comes to Harry Potter. Like, just because she wrote it doesn't mean she actually knows better than me. And specifically, I remember there was like stuff coming out. I don't know if this is just a joke, but I took it seriously. But people were saying like on Pottermore, apparently she said that like wizards can like piss themselves and clean it up with a spell or something. Like they didn't need to use bathrooms, which, like, put the pen down, please.
I was into ghosts, but they're so mainstream now.
A popular anti-criticism argument I see a lot is the let people enjoy things argument, which is basically the idea that if you have nothing nice to say, don't say it. Most people who say this, I notice, are fans of popular media like Star Wars or Taylor Swift. I mean, it makes sense why everyone would have a take on Star Wars because popular media is hegemonic. It's literally everywhere. And so it's an easy target for discourse. It's a much easier target for discourse than, say, like, I don't know, Madame Butterfly. I feel like even Madame Butterfly is like pop culture at this point. But, you know, as English professor Joe Jarowski says, pop culture is such a force in American culture that it would be strange not to talk about it. The sheer number of people watching Marvel movies is impressive. Such movies start to become deeply personal for fans through repeated viewing, cosplay, and so on. Trying to understand why those movies are resonating to that degree with audiences is worthwhile. Highbrow culture like opera and fine art are less available to the general public, especially with like how Broadway gatekeeps all its theater recordings, which drives me crazy. But apparently there is a library somewhere like in the upper west, upper east side that has tapes of Broadway shows that you can watch like in the library. I haven't gone all the way up there because it's pretty far from where I live. Anyway, I'm the problem, I guess. Libraries are a resource. Please use them. But, you know, on the other hand, way more people are able to engage with pop culture, and that's why pop culture is such a good medium for understanding shifting cultural values, and also why a lot of critics love to dig their hands into it. For example, Sex and the City was such a revolutionary show in the late 90s and early 2000s, and still is, because it dared to show women in their 30s having sex and openly talking about it. Just for reference to how PG most shows were prior, 6 years earlier, in 1992, Seinfeld aired an episode about self-pleasuring without ever mentioning the word.
My mother caught me.
Caught you doing what?
You know, I was alone.
In comparison, vibrators were basically a fifth character in the Sex and the City friend group.
It's a neck massager.
No, it's a vibrator.
And this, like, not only destigmatized the discussion of female sexuality culturally, it also normalized more risque depictions on TV. Also, pop culture can be good sometimes. While considered highbrow now, William Shakespeare actually wrote plays the common man could enjoy because in the 16th century, theaters were relatively affordable. For just 1 penny, you could come see a play, though you'd have to stand. Something my acting teacher once told me is that a play is a medium of words and film is a medium of images. So all the grammatical marks written into the script and your vocal ability to project, these are much more important factors when you're doing a stage play, and that's by design because plays were written so that even if an audience member is standing behind a pillar or has a terrible seat because that's all they could afford, they could still understand the story just from hearing the words. Theater used to actually be a much more democratizing art form. At the same time, in defense of fans, I'm very aware that a lot of the media people hate on is media enjoyed by mostly teenage girls. In 1992, Lisa A. Lewis observed that fandom is overwhelmingly associated with adolescent childhood, that is, with a state of arrested development or youth-oriented nostalgia, not mature adulthood. Furthermore, the fan impulse is presented as feminine. At the height of the Twilight phenomenon in 2009, comedian Skylar Stone created a really weird, unfunny stunt in which he tricked Twilight fans into thinking that they were going to see an early screening of New Moon, but instead of showing them the film, he just yelled at them about how stupid they were.
You're not going to see Twilight New Moon tonight. This is a vampire intervention. since you clearly have no clue what the a vampire is.
Of course, this phenomenon long preceded Twilight, long preceded the 1990s. I was reading this article about how in the 1910s, teenage girls were already being criticized in newspapers and magazines for being too invested in movies and shamelessly wanting to become movie stars themselves. For example, in 1914, a movie patron by the name of Elmer Johnson wrote that the maiden just turned 17, who will sob right out loud in the show when the heroic actor displayed on screen saves the girl from the villain, was the worst type of picture show pest. This kind of framing was also encouraged by the media, so like fan publications such as Motion Picture Magazine and Photoplay prompted spectators to take notes on theater-going audiences that they would then publish. By 1915, Photoplay even rewarded the best overheard anecdote reported by a movie-going reader with a $5 cash prize. As Diana Anselmo Sequeira writes, such an editorial choice ultimately bolstered the visibility of girls as preeminent film consumers, but simultaneously encoded young female spectatorship in unruly foolishness. And look, the reality was that all Americans loved film, regardless of class, gender, or age. Girl fans were just given more opportunities to showcase that affection and given more visibility because of aforementioned reasons. And at the same time, all these men in science, like Thomas Smith Clouston, Sigmund Freud, and G. Stanley Hall, were warning audiences about teenage girl-related issues like hysteria and supernatural possessions. And this all culminated into a culture that was more willing to believe that girl fans were a problem. And not that I think teenage girls even need a logical reason to like anything. I do want to point out that many girls were drawn to movie stardom because it was one of the only vehicles that allowed women professional success and financial independence. For example, in 1916, actress Mary Miles Minter was introduced as the Fairy of Filmdom, a star who at 14 was drawing a salary more than that of a United States senator. And that same year, actress Margaret Clark confessed that after the untimely death of her parents, acting allowed her to be self-sufficient. She also advised her girl fans, money means so much to a girl. Money for a woman means 1,000 luxuries that are more vital to her comfort and enjoyment of life than love.
It's one career all females have in common, whether we like it or not. Being a woman.
Speaking of women, though, we've entered this weird territory now where virtually people, women, themselves can become oversaturated as if they were a piece of media. Brendan Holder wrote a really great Substack essay earlier this year called The People's Princess and the Trap of Overexposure. And if you haven't heard the term People's Princess getting tossed around, it's usually used to describe rising stars, so like Io Edebiri, Renee Rapp, and Ice Spice. And the term was originally used to describe Diana, Princess of Wales, who was well-liked for her authenticity and humbleness despite being literal royalty. As Holder writes, to put it plainly, what separates the People's Princess from other it girls is in her name. She's of the people. We uplift her because she's one of us. Her rapid rise is as unlikely as what we could have dared to imagine for ourselves. And because we think so little of ourselves, we view her existence, her success, not only as an achievement on behalf of us, but also in spite of us. We claim her, hoping her shine will rub off on us, our upbringing, our perceived limitations. But ultimately, the fate of the People's Princess is to one day become overexposed and unrecognizable from her once relatable upbringing, sort of like Anne Hathaway or Millie Bobby Brown.
She had a good run in 2023, but I fear that 2024 is the year that the girls turn their back on Renee Rapp. I fear she's going to go the way of a Jennifer Lawrence. I've seen it happen so many times. You love the sass until it just gets to be a little bit too much, and then you decide to take it.
Friend of the channel, Rain Fisher-Kwan, dubbed the public fallout of these female celebrities as getting womaned. In an essay for ID in 2022, she explains the process further. It starts with adoration. She lands starring roles, she writes hit songs, she goes viral, she's new and young and profitable. Then the idolatry begins. Maybe magazines start selling copies by calling her the voice of a generation, or the next Marilyn or Eartha, even though she's barely college age. Maybe they'll label her a feminist icon because she went to a women's march. Maybe she gets too many fans too fast. Either way, she's well on her way to overexposure. The jokes that people found charming 6 months ago are starting to get old, and you're being force-fed her face through every algorithmic channel your phone can handle. And wasn't she always kind of annoying anyway? Look, it's very easy for the tide to turn against someone. I see it time and time again. All it takes is really one small group of people to become annoyed before it snowballs into a massive smear campaign. PM Forney, a founder of the Civility Initiative at Johns Hopkins University, which focuses on manners and social behavior, notes the psychology behind dogpiling. The sensation of belonging to a group of like-minded people activates the pleasure centers of the brain. So at a certain point, something like what has happened to Miss Hathaway acquired momentum, and people were willing and eager to be part of that momentum. And Jack Goncalo, an associate professor of organizational behavior, adds that a lot of Anne's haters probably didn't even harbor negative feelings about her, but were just following a mob mentality. Psychologists call this informational social influence. He explains, if the majority has done my thinking for me, I can move on to something else. People don't want to think. So to continue using Anne Hathaway as an example, because we're already here, in the early 2010s, it was really popular to be a Hathaway hater. They were even dubbed Hatha haters, which, gives extreme jobless behavior, in my opinion. Anne Friedman wrote for The Cut about what most people's problem with Anne was at the time. We simply don't find successful, perfect women all that likable. This was an especially of the moment thought because at the same time, we were seeing the rise of imperfect stars like Jennifer Lawrence. And while I think that nobody is perfect and perceiving someone as perfect is a projection, Jennifer Lawrence definitely leaned into this klutzy, unfiltered part of her personality, which, maybe made Anne's poise and grace more noticeable in comparison because we love to compare women. As Friedman writes of Lawrence, she's self-effacing and funny. She seems like an excellent party companion, taking just about every opportunity to mention how many shots she's had. Before appearing on Jimmy Kimmel, before the red carpet, after winning the Oscar for Best Actress.
And then I came to the Oscars. I'm sorry, I did a shot before I... Sorry.
But not even Jennifer Lawrence could keep the haters away for too long. In the span of a few years, she went from being framed as this authentic, unapologetic, cool girl to being framed as a pick-me. Ellen Jerney writes for BuzzFeed News, when Jennifer fell for a second time at the 2014 Oscars, public opinion quickly shifted. While her previous mishaps, including her first fall, had endeared her to the public, this incident had the opposite effect. She was accused of being calculated, playing up to the cameras, engineering a viral moment for publicity. Critics began questioning whether she was actually performing a shtick. People online expressed their fatigue with her antics. It's honestly just the catch-22 of being a woman in the spotlight, and Lawrence actually predicted her own downfall before all this even unfolded. They've removed all the Chelsea Lately clips from YouTube, which goes back to my most recent video about how things on the internet are just disappearing. Friedman reported that in 2012, Lawrence came onto the show and talked about seeing her face on magazine covers in the grocery store. She said, I was like, I'm going to be that person that everybody hates because it's like, here I am all the time. Brendan Holder looks at Zendaya and Taylor Swift as two opposite sides of the exposure spectrum, with Zendaya arguably paving the way for a more sustainable it-girl career. You see, Zendaya is a pretty private person for the most part. She only uses social media to promote her fashion partnerships or her acting projects. Holder writes, Zendaya only walks the red carpet when she's up for an award or presenting one, and then she's gone. It's this in-and-out presence that keeps her valuable and scarce to an industry and fan base that would willingly take more than she has to offer. On the Challenger's press tour, she mentioned in an interview how she wouldn't go out with her castmates or even go to the grocery store because of her fame. She said, when we were shooting, and I remember you guys / everybody was going out and having things, I was like, I'm not going to join you because I think it might make our night not so fun.
I would have just
maybe
been like,
you would have felt a different thing.
Yeah.
It's clear she genuinely doesn't want constant attention. But what ends up happening is that she becomes this mysterious, enigmatic person that, while popular, remains underexposed. And therefore, ironically, more relevant when she does decide to step into the public sphere. In comparison, Taylor Swift has been consistently in the public eye since she started touring again in March 2023. There's been multiple albums, a global tour, a concert film, award show appearances, a private jet emissions controversy, a variety of paparazzi wongs, and highly reported romantic relationships. And while she's probably way richer because of all this press, I've been seeing more and more videos and articles coming out from people who are getting tired of Taylor and starting to turn on her. Overexposure wouldn't be a problem if women were viewed as something other than as consumable objects. I think it's sadly ironic that Anne Hathaway and Jennifer Lawrence have gotten a positive resurgence in the media lately, mostly because they're like hot moms now, and thus consumable in that regard. Also, they're like spotlight adjacent, sort of like Zendaya, in the sense that they are very choosy about how much they give to the public now, which only makes us want more. By the way, this is not to say that women are above criticism. It's like that one tweet, I do not support all women. Some of you bitches are very dumb. And I know that some of you people are going like in the middle of typing comments right now, being like, there's a lot of reasons to dislike Taylor Swift, like blah, blah, blah. Yes, I think there are many valid reasons to dislike any artist, any celebrity. And I do find it critically annoying when someone blames a critic and calls them like misogynist just because they didn't like a Taylor Swift album. So that's not what I'm trying to say at all, okay? Like, let me make that clear. As a last point, I want to include what Eleanor Stern has said about the taking down of women writers in the literary space that I think is really interesting.
On the other hand, it kind of disturbs me that like so much of the sort of literary criticism, like popular literary criticism ecosystem right now is basically people becoming literary it girls by writing viral reviews, taking down other literary it girls. It's basically the literary version of like Anne Hathaway or like Jennifer Lawrence becoming too popular and then being like demoted to being unpopular again in this endless cycle, except because these people are critics, they themselves are becoming famous and replacing the people they're criticizing.
And yes, so even though I believe that negative and positive reviews fund a healthy art ecosystem, I also think it's worth unpacking why women tend to get the most backlash and whether or not all of it is deserved, or if there's some women in the mix who get the short end of the stick for just being women. Thank you all so much for listening. We've reached the end of the video. Yeah, I'm also like super like amped up on coffee right now, so I feel like I need to keep talking, but I really don't need to keep talking. That's all I have to say. Maybe it's your turn to start talking. If you have any opinions on criticism, on women, on female celebrities, on just the idea of like having to play nice in this industry, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys later. Okay, bye.